For 20 years, Henry Foster followed the same quiet ritual every Thursday morning. Just after sunrise, he would place a bouquet of freshly picked daisies into the basket of his old bicycle and ride down the winding country road that led to Maplewood Cemetery. He didn't speak much to anyone in town, and most people barely remembered what he sounded like. His neighbors would sometimes peek through their curtains and whisper to each other, "There goes Henry again," always with those flowers. To outsiders, it was just an old man clinging to the past. A lonely figure with silver hair and sad eyes, caught in a loop he couldn't escape. But for Henry, this weekly pilgrimage was sacred, a promise kept, a wound revisited, and a conversation continued even if no one ever answered back. You see, Margaret wasn't just his wife. She was his youth, his laughter, his shelter from the storms of life. And though she had been gone for 2 decades, Henry still remembered every crease of her smile and the way she used to hum while folding laundry. But what the townspeople didn't know was that Henry wasn't only grieving her absence. He was living with something far heavier, regret, because love, when left unspoken for too long, turns into a silence that echoes louder than any words. And Henry had learned that far too late. On the 20th anniversary of her death, something changed. The air felt different. The sun rose slower, and as Henry gently placed the flowers at Margaret's grave, he heard a sound that made his heart stop. Cold, a voice, a woman's voice. It came from behind him, soft, hesitant, and impossibly familiar. "Are you Henry Foster?" Henry turned around, his hands trembling. What he saw would change everything he thought he knew. About Margaret, about himself, and about the life he thought was long behind him. Henry's heart thudded in his chest. He hadn't heard someone say his full name in years. Not like that. Not with that careful, almost fragile tone. Slowly, he turned around. There, standing a few steps away, was a woman in her late 20s. She had a worn leather satchel hanging off her shoulder, a notebook in one hand, and a puzzled look in her eyes. But it was her face, more specifically her eyes, that took the breath from Henry's lungs. They were Margaret's eyes, not similar, the same. That stormy shade of gray-blue, like a cloud just before it breaks into rain. "I'm sorry," she said, stepping closer. "Are you Henry Foster?" "From Ashfield." Henry blinked, unsure if he was dreaming or maybe having some kind of breakdown. "Yes," he said hoarsely, "I am." The girl hesitated, biting her lower lip. I think you might be my grandfather." Silence, long and heavy. Henry's fingers twitched at his sides. I never had children. Margaret and I," his voice cracked. "We never had a family." The girl pulled something from her bag, a faded envelope yellowed at the edges. She held it out to him with 2 hands, as though it were something sacred. "I found this in my mother's things after she passed last year," she said. "It's addressed to you. It's in Margaret's handwriting." Henry stared at it. His fingers refused to reach for it. "I don't understand," he whispered. The girl took a breath. "My mother's name was Anna. She always said she was adopted, but she had questions." I started digging into her past. I found old photos, hospital records, and eventually this letter. I think Margaret was her birth mother. "And you?" Henry stumbled back, knees buckling. He sat down hard on the stone bench beside the grave, clutching at his chest like he was trying to hold the pieces of his heart together. "You're saying Margaret had a child?" The girl nodded. Henry's voice was barely a whisper. "Right, and she never told me." He took the letter from the girl's trembling hands. The envelope was brittle. It felt like it might crumble with time. His name, Henry Foster, was written in Margaret's flowing script, unmistakable even after all these years. He hesitated, then opened it. "My dearest Henry, if you're reading this, then perhaps fate has finally brought truth to light. There's something I never told you. Something I never could." Henry's eyes scanned the words. As he read, the cemetery around him faded into silence. The letter spoke of a summer before they were married, of a moment of fear and secrecy. Margaret had been pregnant, terrified of what it would mean for Henry's future, his family's expectations. So she went away, had the baby, gave her up for adoption. And when she came back, she never told him. "I wanted to spare you the burden," she wrote. "You had dreams. And I was too much of a coward to risk losing you." Tears slid down Henry's cheeks. He had spent decades thinking he knew everything about the woman he loved. But now, with this letter in his hand and this young stranger before him, he realized he had only known part of the story. "What's your name?" he asked finally, voice ragged. "Emily," she said. "Emily Dawson." Henry nodded slowly. I think we have a lot to talk about." They sat together on the weathered bench, the wind brushing gently through the trees, stirring the fallen leaves like whispers from the past. Henry's hands trembled slightly as he folded Margaret's letter and tucked it back into the envelope. His eyes glazed with unshed tears. Emily remained quiet, giving him space. Her eyes, so much like Margaret's, studied him with the cautious hope of someone seeking connection, not confrontation. "You look like her," Henry finally said. "But not just in the eyes. The way you stand, the way you hesitate before you speak. Margaret used to do that too." Emily offered a soft smile. "My mother-in-law was quiet, thoughtful. I always felt like she carried something heavy inside her. I didn't understand it when I was young, but now I think she always knew she came from somewhere else." Somewhere. That mattered. Henry nodded slowly. "Did she know about me?" "She wasn't sure. She used to say there were missing pages in her story. She searched for Margaret but never found her. After my mother died, I couldn't let the trail go cold. I had to know who we came from. And now here you are," Henry whispered. In front of me, after all these years, he closed his eyes. So many moments flashed through his mind, the way Margaret had cried quietly some nights staring out the window. The distant look in her eyes when she watched children play at the park. He had always assumed it was because they couldn't have children, that it was grief from what never came to be. But now he saw the truth. It wasn't what didn't happen that haunted her. It was what did. They left the cemetery together that afternoon. Henry walking slower than usual, Emily matching his pace with patience and grace. He invited her to his modest home just on the edge of town, the same home he and Margaret had shared for nearly 40 years. It was filled with quiet memories and fading photographs. The scent of old books and lavender still lingered in the corners. "This place hasn't changed much," Henry said with a nostalgic chuckle. Margaret had a thing for timeless furniture and dusty shelves. Emily walked through the rooms gently, pausing at a photo of Henry and Margaret on their wedding day. She was beautiful. She was everything, Henry said. "And I let her carry this secret alone." Emily turned to face him. "Maybe. She thought she was protecting you." He looked at her with heavy eyes. "Maybe, but I would have loved your mother. I would have loved her with everything I had." Emily's voice was soft. "Maybe you still can." She reached into her satchel and pulled out a small box. "This belonged to my mom. I thought maybe you should have it." Inside the box were a few old photographs, a bracelet with Margaret's initials, and a cassette tape. Henry's breath caught when he saw it. "A tape?" he asked. "She made it before she passed," Emily said. "She never mailed it." "I don't think she knew how to find you, but I think she wanted closure." Henry took the tape in his hand as if it were made of glass. He walked over to an old cassette player tucked beside the bookshelf, dusty but still intact. With shaking fingers, he pressed play. A soft click dot and then her voice. "Hi, I don't know if you'll ever hear this, Henry. This is Anna. I'm your daughter." Henry froze. "I've spent most of my life wondering who you were. Mom Margaret never said much, but I found pieces, little hints. She never stopped loving you, you know? I think that's why she kept the secret, because love sometimes makes us do foolish things." Henry leaned forward, gripping the edge of the table. "I don't blame you. I don't blame her. I wanted to say thank you." for loving her, for being someone I imagined as kind and and steady and real. If you ever hear this, please don't carry regret. You loved her. That was enough. The tape ended with silence, and for a moment the room felt suspended in it. Emily wiped her cheeks with the sleeve of her jacket. Henry said nothing. He just stared at the player, his jaw tight, his hands clenched. Then finally he whispered, "She had my voice." Emily smiled gently. Yes, she did. A week had passed since Emily handed Henry the cassette tape. They had listened to it twice more. And each time Henry heard something different in Anna's voice. Courage, warmth, maybe even forgiveness. But what struck him most was how deeply she longed to be known, and how much Margaret must have struggled with keeping her hidden from his life. One crisp morning, Henry called Emily and asked, "Would you like to take a walk with me today? There are places I want to show you, pieces of Margaret I think you should see." Emily agreed without hesitation. They started at the town square, a place bustling with small shops, creaky benches, and street musicians playing soft jazz. It was here, Henry said, that he and Margaret had met. He pointed toward a little bookstore with ivy crawling along its brick walls. She used to come here every Saturday, he recalled, a fond smile softening his face. It's always in the poetry section. She hated romantic cliches but loved poems about rain. Emily tilted her head, amused. Did she ever write poems? Only once, Henry replied. For our anniversary. It was terrible, full of mixed metaphors and clunky rhymes. But I kept it in my wallet for years until it faded into tissue. From there, they strolled to the community garden behind the church. Margaret called this her sanctuary, Henry said. She planted tulips every spring, claimed they bloomed better when she hummed to them. Emily bent down beside a no-empty patch of soil. She sounds like someone who found joy in quiet things. She was never loud, Henry said. But she had presence. When she walked into a room, you felt like you should sit up straighter. Not out of fear, out of respect. Emily looked around, imagining her grandmother kneeling among the flowers, hands in the dirt, humming to herself. A part of her felt oddly close to this woman she had never met, not through stories, but through the very air that had once surrounded her. Later, they walked past the old train station, long since decommissioned. We used to talk about running away, Henry mused. Not from anything, just toward something. But life got in the way. We built a life here instead. They sat again, this time on a bench just outside the station, facing the fields. Henry turned to Emily, eyes shining. I thought I knew everything about her, he said quietly. But there were shadows she never let me step into. Emily hesitated. Can I ask you something? Of course. Did you ever want children? Henry took a long breath. Yes, we tried. For years. Doctors, prayers, waiting. It just never happened. I blamed myself. And when she stopped bringing it up, I assumed we were just moving on. He looked down at his hands. I never imagined that she had already had a child, that she carried that pain in silence. Emily touched his arm gently. She didn't stop loving you. I think she was just afraid of losing what she had. Henry nodded, his voice soft. And now I've found what I didn't know I lost. As the sun dipped low and turned the sky into streaks of orange and gold, they made one. Final stop, Margaret's old art studio. It was a tiny room above the bakery, left untouched after her passing. Henry still paid the rent, unable to let it go. The key slipped into the lock easily, and the door creaked open. Dust floated in the air, catching the sunlight like stars. Canvases lined the walls, unfinished landscapes, abstract swirls of color, and portraits of unnamed women with familiar eyes. Emily walked slowly, taking it all in. She painted her feelings, Henry said. When words failed her, the brush didn't. In the far corner of the room, Emily found a covered canvas. She gently pulled back the cloth. It was a painting of a little girl standing at the edge of a lake, arms outstretched toward the water. Her reflection was blurred, but the girl's expression was unmistakable. Hope, wonder, and a quiet yearning. Henry stared at it, stunned. "I've never seen this one." Emily traced her fingers along the frame. "That's my mother. Seen this photo in her childhood album. I never knew who took it." They stood in silence, the truth between them stretching gently like dawn. Margaret had never let go of Anna, and now neither would they. A few days later, Henry called Emily with a proposal. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice more certain than usual. Margaret never got the kind of farewell that truly reflected who she was. The funeral was small, quiet, just a handful of people and a lot left unsaid. He paused. "Would you help me give her something more? Not for the town, not even for me, but for you. And for her." Emily's throat tightened. "I'd love that," she said. The following Sunday, they returned to the garden behind the church, the place Margaret had called her sanctuary. Emily brought fresh tulip bulbs. Henry brought a folding table, a vintage record player, and a stack of Margaret's old vinyls. They didn't invite anyone else. Instead, they each carried pieces of Margaret with them, her paintings, her words, her stories. Henry wore the navy scarf she'd knitted for him their first winter together. Emily wore her mother's locket, something she hadn't taken off since. Listening to the cassette, Henry opened the memorial by placing a single candle on the table. He lit it, then turned to Emily. "Would you like to start?" Emily nodded and stepped forward, unfolding a letter. It was short, handwritten, a note. She'd written just that morning. "To the grandmother I never met," she began, voice trembling. "I don't know the sound of your laugh or how your hugs felt. But I know your courage. I know you painted when your heart was heavy. I know you loved tulips and poems about the rain. And I know you kept my mother's memory alive, even when the world asked you to forget." She looked at Henry, eyes glistening. "And now we'll keep yours alive." Henry stepped forward next. Instead of a letter, he simply reached for the record player and placed the needle on the vinyl. A soft, crackling jazz melody filled the garden. He looked up at the sky. "She used to dance to this in the kitchen," he whispered, "with bare feet and flour in her hair." Then, surprising even himself, Henry offered his hand to Emily. "Would you honor her with one dance?" Emily smiled and took it. They moved slowly, awkward at first, then gently in rhythm. The garden around them was quiet, except for the music and the rustling leaves. No grand speeches. No applause. Just a grandfather and the granddaughter he never knew he had, honoring a woman who once held both of them in her heart, even from a distance. After the song faded, Henry walked to the edge of the garden where the soil was soft. He knelt and began planting the tulip bulbs one by one. Emily joined him, pressing her hands into the earth. They worked in silence, side by side, until the row was finished. When they stood, Henry reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something. Wrapped in cloth, he unwrapped it slowly, revealing the poem Margaret had once written him. It was wrinkled, water-stained, ink faded in parts. He placed it gently beneath the soil. "Let her words bloom," he said. As they prepared to leave, Emily turned to him. "Do people know?" she asked. "About me, I mean." Henry looked thoughtful. "Not yet," he admitted, "but they will." The next day, Henry returned to Margaret's grave. As always, he brought flowers. But this time, he didn't place them quietly and walk away. He stayed. He pulled out a folding chair, sat down, and for the first time in 2 decades, spoke aloud. "Margaret," he said, "I met her. I met your granddaughter. And you'd be proud," he chuckled softly. "She's got your fire." And her mother's eyes. He leaned back and looked at the sky. "I hope you're at peace now, because we are finally starting to be." A week later, Emily stood outside the old house. On Maple Street, Henry's home for more than 50 years. It was the same home where her mother had once lived, where Margaret had painted late into the night, and where silence had settled in for far too long. Henry opened the door with a smile and stepped aside. "Come in," he said. "It's your home too now." Inside, the house smelled of coffee and old books. The furniture was mismatched but clean. Lived-in, family photos lined the shelves, all of them missing something. Or rather, someone. Emily looked around quietly, her gaze falling on a dusty frame in the corner. It held a faded photo of Henry and Margaret on their wedding day. "I used to be afraid to change anything," Henry said, noticing her pause, as if moving a picture would erase her even more. Emily walked over, picked up the frame, and wiped the dust away with her sleeve. "She's not going anywhere," she said. That evening, Henry did something he hadn't done in decades. He cooked a family dinner. Emily helped. They burned the rolls and overcooked the roast, but neither cared. The laughter in the kitchen made up for every culinary failure at sunset. Henry brought out a bottle of wine, the last from a crate he and Margaret had bought. For their 25th anniversary, they'd planned to open one every year. Only a few had ever been touched. He uncorked it slowly and poured them each a glass to Margaret. He said. Emily raised her glass. Two beginnings that start a little late, but right on time. They clinked their glasses and sat at the dining table, one that had felt far too big for one person, but suddenly just right for two. The next day, Henry took Emily into town. People stared. Some greeted him with familiarity, others with curiosity. At the grocery store, the clerk asked, "Who's the young lady?" Henry didn't hesitate. "My granddaughter," he said proudly. Emily blinked, taken aback. It was the first time she'd heard it out loud. The clerk smiled. "Well, it's about time." As the weeks passed, Emily helped Henry digitize Margaret's old paintings and letters. They started a small online gallery called Margaret's Garden, showcasing her forgotten work. People began to take notice, not just of the art, but of the story behind it, and slowly the town that had once turned its back began to lean in. One morning, Henry received a letter in the mail. It was from the town council offering to dedicate a corner of the public park in Margaret's name, a small plaque, a garden of tulips. He showed the letter to Emily, who smiled and squeezed his hand. She finally got her place. She whispered, "Henry." Nodded. So did we. On the first day of spring, Henry and Emily returned to Margaret's grave, this time together. They didn't bring flowers. Instead, they brought paintbrushes and a wooden bench they'd restored. They set it up beneath the tree nearby, the one where Henry had first seen Margaret sketching all those years ago. A small sign hung from the back, "For those we loved in silence, and now love out loud." They sat together, side by side, in the garden of memory and forgiveness, of endings and new starts. The wind whispered through the trees, and though Margaret was gone, the love she'd planted, broken, buried, but never dead, had finally come back to bloom. Sometimes, life gives us second chances not to change the past, but to finally understand it. Henry spent 20 years bringing flowers to a grave, mourning not just the loss of his wife, but the silence that followed. And Emily spent her life wondering why her mother never spoke of her father. In the end, they both found something far greater than answers. They found each other. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to take a quiet moment today. Think of someone you've lost, whether through distance, silence, or time. Maybe it's a friend you haven't called in years, sibling you stopped writing to, a child you miss but don't know how to reach. It's never too late to say what wasn't said. Leave a comment below and tell us, who is someone you wish you could reconnect with. Your story might inspire someone else to take that first step. And if this video reminded you of the beauty in late forgiveness, the quiet power of healing, or the importance of memory, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Here at Real Moments, we believe that real stories like yours have the power to bring light to the darkest corners of the heart. Because sometimes, all it takes is one voice behind you to remind you that you're not alone. Subscribe for more stories that matter. Share your story in the comments. And never stop believing in the power of love, no matter how much time has passed.